This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Wilmarie Newton, and I will be moderating this call. I ask that you please mute yourself in order to avoid background noise while the presenters are speaking. However, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat box. If you're calling in from your cell phone, please take a moment to physically mute your cell phone, as I'm unable to mute you from my computer unless I mute all participants and will not be able to unmute you after. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website. Patrice?
Thanks so much, Wilmarie, and we're so glad so many of you could join us this afternoon. About 10 days ago at our regular weekly board chair check-in, Leslie suggested that it would be great if board chairs and superintendents who have established a variety of reopening committees had the chance to share with each other. And so we put this together. This is really your meeting. The goals would be to give you the opportunity to discuss what areas your committees cover, who serves on them, and your progress as well as your challenges. And we can decide at the end of this meeting, do some follow-up and just determine whether or not you would like a subsequent conversation. So I think since it was Leslie Crotty's idea, who is the chair of the Watertown Board of Education, I'm going to let her start first, and then we'll go to Stratford. Leslie?
Thank you, Patrice, and really thank you to CABE for allowing this opportunity. I think it's really helpful to be able to work through some of this and share what different boards of education are doing. So to answer your first question about who's serving on the Watertown School Reentry Advisory Council, we created the council back about 2 months ago, month and a half to 2 months ago. We just started meeting in the last few weeks. Initially, the superintendent, myself as board chair, one other board member who is the Curriculum and Instruction Committee chair, our director of curriculum instruction for the district, our high school principal, our middle school principal, one of our elementary school principals, a special education supervisor, the deputy chief of our police department, president of the teachers union, a school medical advisor, the doctor that serves our district, and our president of our nurses union. So those are the people on the advisory council. We have people from all different aspects in the district. And initially, we introduced the idea of what our purpose was, which is to develop a fairly comprehensive plan for reopening that prioritizes the health and well-being of students and the staff, and hopefully provide solutions to the logistical issues and all of the different challenges related to instructional delivery and reopening. The first meeting that we had as a council together, we started with a couple of goals to really unearth some of the potential concerns related to school opening on a grand scale, and then to just provide members of the committee with an overall review of the process that we would use to develop our plan. The American Enterprise Institute Blueprint for Back to School that CABE shared with all of the board members was really, Dr. Harrison, my superintendent, and I felt really was a great blueprint for us to look at. And of all the materials that we were given through all our different resources, that really helped a lot. We looked at the underlying assumptions that the blueprint made in terms of what schools will have to do to revamp their day-to-day operations. And they broke it down into, I believe, 6 different areas where you needed to create your framework for reopening. School operations, whole child supports, school personnel, academics, distance learning, and then a category of general considerations. We took that AEI blueprint because we felt it was a really solid plan and created our own 3 areas that any one of those 6 would find a home in. So ours are health and well-being, operations and logistics, and instructional delivery. And those 3 areas of our, those 3 areas make up the framework for what we're doing on this committee. So we took the health and well-being and we started to talk through what some of the issues were, clarifying them more specifically, and then starting to assess the priorities using the Trigo Ed method. I don't know if other districts are familiar with the Trigo Ed process of decision making, but that's something that our district uses, and I've been trying to get the Board of Education as well as all of our staff to use. What that does is really helps people to do a situation appraisal, really dig down into the key steps to determining that before people start giving out answers to problems and solutions. And if anybody's interested in any more about that and creating a Trigo Ed process, you can let me or Dr. Harrison know. He's very well versed on it. So health and well-being, we started to talk about the different issues that we would have under health and well-being and created what we felt was the subject area expert list, where we chose other people within the district in our community that we felt under the framework of health and well-being, who those people were that should be involved on that committee. We did the same for operations and logistics. For example, it would be prudent of us to have our head custodian on that, our facilities manager on that, somebody from Public Works in town, etc., so that it's not just council members of the reopening council, it's also individual subject area experts on each of those frameworks. And then operations logistics, and then our hardest one and the biggest challenge we feel is the third framework, which is instructional delivery. So for our process, again, we divided into those three groups. We're using the Trigo Ed scan protocol to identify the issues and the concerns under each one, and then taking the action steps from that those scans create to problem solve. Taking some of the models and plans and regulations that have been given and applying them to each of those categories that we have. We have already had 2 instructional delivery meetings. They've gone very well. I think initially some of the challenges that you've asked us to talk about for all groups are and continue to be staffing. I think the area of staffing for the committee to work through, talking about increases due to class sizes being small, substitutes due to potential teachers getting sick and having to be out. I think we're going to have some real concerns there, also with unions and negotiations, depending on what model we choose to go with. The second area of challenges that really affects all 3 categories of our framework would be class sizes. Then the third challenge that we have is the practicality with younger students. You know, 50 to 60% of the work that's done in the lower grades is done in small groups, centers and discovery and reading groups. I think that is going to be instructional delivery in the younger grades is going to be a big challenge with some of the distancing regulations and class sizes. And then fourth, I think the most difficult thing will be the instructional model. It's the most important piece and it takes the most planning. But ultimately, we have been spending decades trying to take the mindset of teaching in front of the classroom and change it. It's taken decades to move away from delivering instruction just in the beginning, in the front of the class. And now we find ourselves all of a sudden back in a position where that might just be all we can do. And I think that piece of it is going to take the most planning, and it's the most important. Obviously, the health and well-being is, but I think it's a little bit easier to work through those regulations on temperature taking and measuring out 6 feet and all of those things, but and separating sick children and so forth. But I think the instructional model is probably our biggest challenge.
Thank you so much. That's a very helpful framework. I think now I'd like to turn it over to Stratford. We have Superintendent Janet Robinson and Board Chair Allison Delben. And Janet, Allison, I don't know who wants to go first or if you're going to tag team.
You want to start, Allison?
Sure. So I know Janet had asked for volunteers from the community, parents, board members to be part of a task force for reopening. We have one board member on that committee who has been communicating with me mostly about what's going on. She's mostly concerned with busing, to be honest, and how we're going to tackle that and just the costs that are going to come along with reopening. So, and really the size of our schools and how to manage that piece that we don't really have enough room. But that's just an introduction. And Dr. Robinson, if you want to take over.
Thank you, Allison. The enthusiasm from the community to participate has been overwhelming. When we put out wanting a stakeholder representation, we got over 90 people that wanted to be part and parcel of this. So we've taken that and we are breaking it down into smaller pieces, but giving people the opportunity to feel that they're being heard and that they're included. And so what we took a little bit different frame, but still including the things that Leslie was talking about. We have them divided into groups that are focused very specifically on some pieces. One is academic. What does the teaching and learning look like? Here we have worked so hard to make everything collaborative, groups, these types of things. And now suddenly we're going to separate all these kids. So they're going to be looking at the academic piece. Now, obviously, as soon as you start to get in academics, it overflows in other areas, but we are having them develop each area. And then tomorrow, my group leaders are coming together to share, and then we'll start moving from there. So one is academic, one is social emotional learning. We do not know what's going on in the families right now. The structure of school has been the one thing that's held a lot of kids together. They don't have that structure in school, and other things that we feel that we need to deal with. Also, being on that state committee for SEL, I can hear the conversations around universal screening and so forth. So other people are concerned about that also in terms of what we need to deal with. Family engagement is also part of this. Then we move over to the more operational side where we have facilities, we have transportation, and we put the safety, social, health and well-being in that category also, that they be collaborating. We have some of the most phenomenal nurses that have been working with our public health department throughout. They've been doing contact tracing, they've been very engaged. So our public health folks who want to be on this committee are just a little tied up right now. So they're doing a lot of liaison with them. And hopefully when we get to the next level, our public health department will be able to be a little more involved with this. But in the meantime, we have nurses that are very astute and are working closely with that. They're taking on all the issues. Busing is Allison mentioned, busing has everyone frightened. When you start thinking about, we've had our bus company call and want a conference, and they want us to tell them when we're going to start. Well, to me, this is one of the biggest obstacles. I can't tell them anything. We could set everything up for starting, and the day before we start school, we have an outbreak and all bets are off. So they're looking for something more concrete, but they made some things concrete for me. They said, Janet, do you realize that on a 60 passenger bus, if we want to have them 6 feet apart, you're going to have about 10, 11 kids. So everything we look at seems to just throw dollar signs out in terms of how we go about doing this. Our classroom sizes they're not huge, but the classrooms themselves, our old buildings are not really big. So if we look at having to divide classrooms up, then how do we do this? So part of that facilities issue is there a different configuration that we need? They're looking at blended models. They're looking at alternating days in school. They're looking at session, they're looking at everything they possibly can and doing the negatives and the positives. We're kind of put this all into three scenarios. One is we start back in the fall. What's that going to look like, and what's everyone going to be like? Secondly, we do not start back in the fall. Third, what if we start back and then we have to go back out again? Now, we did this very quickly this time, but could we do it better? What could that look like? How do we mitigate? What have we learned from this experience? So part of this is we are going to be surveying our parents, our teachers, and our students to say, get that feedback. We want to know how to do it better. I think our teachers were phenomenal. I thought they did a great job. And we were one of the first districts to go out, so we didn't have anyone we could follow. So I thought they were fabulous, but we always want to get better. So that's the part we're looking at right now. So the lens for every one of these groups is our scenarios. So we got a lot of work ahead of us. And I'll tell you, everything we look at, you start going, oh, that presents a problem. How do we overcome this? So and of course, not knowing what the health will be in August and September is making it more difficult. Allison, did I cover most of it?
I think so. Yep.
That's great. I really appreciate the approach of how do we overcome this problem as opposed to this is an absolute obstacle. We have to throw up our hands and say, we can't be doing this.
Yeah.
Let's open it up now to comments, questions. If people want to share what they're doing in their district, or if you have any specific questions for Leslie, Janet, or Al.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me, Patrice?
Yes, go ahead.
So last week at our board chair discussion, which was also about reopening, Michelle Koo was reporting from the RESC team and raised this question, the obvious question about kind of the responsibility of the schools in a socially distant environment to kind of the tension between the health and safety structures and the need to have a place for the kids to go every day so that the parents can go to work. And so I thought about that every day, since that meeting. And basically, I've personally have come to the conclusion, I'm curious what other people are thinking, that if we have to have social distancing, it's impossible to do both. And we have to pick one or the other. And I think I'm in Westport, I think we would pick health and safety. But I recognize that that is a loss to parents. And I don't know how that people are not going to navigate that. And it's more of a problem, to a varying degree in different communities. But I'm curious if people are grappling with that and if they've come to any conclusions. And this is not a conclusion of our district, just of me personally. That's my question.
Janet, go ahead.
That's an interesting dilemma. And frankly, what I hear from some of the teachers and the parents is they're concerned that this push to open up economically will force schools to open before they're really prepared or they feel that it's safe to. It's a real concern that people have. If you look at the data, those regional task forces, there's 6 of them, they sent out a survey that was done before we even started the work on those task forces, and the overwhelmingly safety was the top concern. I mean, other things they just paled in comparison. Everything on the top 4 were all related to safety, which tells me that the parents, they will take safety over expediency or anything else also. I mean, who wants to put their child in a position that there is a risk? So I think our job we look at is what are we going to do this in the best interest of kids and how do we keep our kids safe?
One of the issues that's come up with us in regards to safety, which I'm sure is similar to most of your districts, is that there are parents, regardless of what regulations there are for school opening and what safety precautions are taken, they will not be sending their kids to school. So there's the obligation to provide instruction to those students who might not necessarily be compromised or have any health compromised people in their home, whom we would provide instruction for, but just purely are not comfortable with sending their kids to school, back to school yet. And what's our obligation for also providing them the delivery of instruction too? So that's a big concern of ours.
Mm-hmm.
Leslie, someone has asked for you to specify the name of the tool that you use to sort of cut to the chase in decision making.
Sure.
We couldn't catch the acronym.
It's Trego Ed, TREGOED. And it's a situation appraisal.
Great, thanks. Other comments, issues, challenges?
Hi, this is Marion. I have a question. I appreciate the due diligence that I see other districts doing to prepare for, what the fall is going to look like. But I wonder how that works in conjunction with the work being done with the regional advisory teams. I thought the background of that was to have some kind of uniformity in how we respond and how we prepare for the fall. So I just wanted to know if you could address that.
Janet, since you're on one of the regional advisory teams, do you want to take that one?
I am also on the regional advisory team for our county, and I find that we are pretty much hand in glove in our discussions. And also I'm able to bring some of what we learn in the regional meeting back to our district, so that we can talk a little bit about, this is what we're seeing, this is direction. The regional committees are not coming up with a cookie cutter that's going to meet everybody's needs. They're pulling together all the information they can, but every one of our districts is a little different, and the virus doesn't tell us ahead of time where he's going to decide to go. So we may have different remedies for different situations. Leslie was talking about even if we open, some parents will send their kids back. But I also have some teachers that say, hey, I've got a compromised child at home and I can't come back. So we may have a lot of hybrid types of things that, due to our particular circumstances, we need to take a look at. But I think the regional committees are going to be guiding in terms of just showing what they have learned in terms of what people want, basically. But I don't see, we're Connecticut. We don't necessarily all walk lockstep. We have different needs in different districts.
For those of you that are on those committees, is there do you get a sense, or what's your gut telling you about whether or not the state's going to take the model recommendations that all of these committees, local and regional committees, are giving them? Do you think that they're going to come back with, 3 or 4 different models in terms of guiding the districts as to what they should be doing? Or do you think it's going to be, 1 or 2 different examples of what we should be doing, and it being very regulated and less guidelined?
Well, Bob and Patrice can probably speak to this, but what my experience has been guidance. They've left a lot of openings, so I would expect it's going to be guidance, and then you kind of move from there.
Bob serves on the reopening subcommittee specifically focused on education, that the regional advisory teams are feeding this data and information to. So Bob, do you want to comment?
Yes, we have had discussions on these issues. CABE brings the board members who are on the regional advisory teams together once a week, every week after their meetings, and we discuss some of the issues. And then I bring a lot of that guidance back to the committee. But it's a committee where we make recommendations to and with Commissioner Cardona, and then he brings it to the governor and the guidance committee, which the guidance committee are really the medical people, because whatever we're going to suggest, we want the medical people to agree with. So Miguel brings it to the governor eventually. The governor makes his own decision. So at this point, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We have looked at different models, but I'm not at liberty to say where they're going, but I have pushed very hard for flexibility in a number of different areas. And I have pressed the state to provide more resources, to do more on equity, and also to provide the flexibility that districts are going to need with all the concerns you have. We had made a recommendation based on the medical data on school buses, for instance. And we know you can't get very many kids on a school bus if you're going every other seat like the diagram shows. But that's what the medical people said. So these are very, very tough issues. As I've said on a lot of these calls, the medical people aren't even in agreement on everything. You ask them whether an adult or a child can again get coronavirus after they've already had it. They may talk about antibodies, but nobody really knows the answer yet. Nobody knows the answers on when some kind of a vaccine will be available. Nobody knows whether what we have seen, especially in New York City, with the kids getting hit by either the coronavirus or some offshoot of it. It's a very, very, very small percentage, but it's happening. So we're trying to go by what the medical people say. And we know it's going to cause a lot of concerns, a lot of difficulties for our members. But my hope is at the end of the day, there will be enough flexibility provided by the state. And again, I'm one voice on this committee. And like your committees, you make recommendations, then we make a recommendation, then the medical people look at it and the governor's people look at it and the governor makes a decision. So I can't tell you for sure what's going to happen, except there's a lot of uncertainty. We have to stick together. We have to work hard together. And I know we'll be providing any information we can as soon as it's available. Not a great answer, I know, but that's like the best I can on this issue at this point.
This is Fiona. This is Fiona from the Torrington Board of Education. I wanted to ask a question if possible.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if any of the reopening committees are looking at the financial implication and how these things are going to be paid for to be implemented. The CARES Act, the money that we received from that isn't going to come close to covering these expenses. And as budgets are finalizing, a lot of towns are getting zero. Are they looking to fund this through their operating budget for next year? Are these types of expenses have the potential to be FEMA reimbursed? And just I'm wondering if any of the committees are looking at how they're going to address paying for all of these things.
I would tell you, Fiona, that, geez, all these emails or texts, they have to happen the few minutes I'm talking.
But Bob, Ann Baldwin needs you. That's the message.
All right, I'll get off, but I don't know what she wants. But what I will say is that certainly our committee has started looking at figures. Cass, working with Rebecca in our office and CAPS, did sort of a little examination of what it would cost if we were to provide 3 masks a day, decent masks a day, to all the children in our schools and all the staff. And the amount for a decent one was like $300 million. That's not going to happen. The state doesn't have that kind of money. And I'm not sure I'm just one vote again on the committee, would be in favor of spending $300 million on masks, where everybody's also hurting on buses, the classrooms, the teachers. There was a USA Today report that says 20% of teachers say they're not coming back this year because of COVID-19. So that's going to have to be taken care of. We're going to need substitute teachers. There are, as you all know, even better than me, a lot of different issues. And at this point, the state has not said that they would pay for it, but we are pushing them to make that kind of a promise, at least on some level. And with that, I'm going to get off for a few minutes. I'm sorry.
Janet and Leslie, do you want to make any comment about any considerations your committees have made around the funding issues?
I can just share with you that tonight at 7 o'clock, we're facing being cut by $263,000 from our town council. In terms of financing some of the related expenses that we have to reopening, we, as of right now, not knowing if there's going to be any additional funding from the state or the federal government other than the Title I that we're getting out of the CARES Act, we're looking in our budget to see what programs we will not be doing, where we can find some additional savings. And clearly that depends on what model we use. But we're already, there's already programs we know we're not going to run to ensure that we have some leeway with, especially in the area of staffing.
Thanks.
That's as far as we've got.
This is Karen from Greenwich. I wanted to sort of ask a question along the lines of what Leslie was just speaking to. We had a major reduction in our operational budget, and we're trying to sort of see what things we need to cut in order to hit our budget number. And I was curious to see what other districts are looking at in reductions to their operations budgets, while we're also facing all of these unknown costs to reopen in the fall. I think that's sort of an important piece of our discussions going forward in some of our reopening committee meetings as well.
Well, I'd have to say that Stratford is in a similar situation to Leslie's describing. Tonight we have a board meeting, and there'll be some decisions have to be made. We got an additional 200,000 plus cut out of our request, so we're having to look at that too. So, but it's very hard. There's some things you want to do the right thing, and you want kids to have everything that they need, and it's just not easy. It's not easy at all to take away programs from kids.
Especially right now when we know clearly, regardless of how education will be delivered in September, that the needs of the students are greater than ever, academic as well as social emotional.
Yeah.
I just want to make the observation that I've been on a couple of forums where there are heads of schools in Europe, some of which have opened and been open for a month or 6 weeks. And what some of them found is that while parents initially said they would not send their child back to school, in a couple of days or a week, their comfort level increased significantly, and those children did actually return. So I think it's one thing to ask the question hypothetically, and another when the reality is there and they see what protocols for health and safety are in place. Other comments or things that you can share about this stage of the process?
Teresa, I can speak about to the Western Connecticut Regional Advisory, just because I think it is interesting being on this call, that I think even though we're kind of all working in similar places, there are maybe differences. I think at least my experience on that Western group is that we're asking and pushing for more state recommendations and to not provide tons of flexibility. Because although we're all different, and that group has, Danbury and Sherman both sitting on it. Sherman's a K-8 district of about 800 students. I think like we saw with graduation, the flexibility can't be so open-ended that it creates conflicts between districts and parents. And I think an open-ended amount, and I see, everybody trying to work on a good model, but we're going to spend a lot of time each trying to solve certain issues where if there can be one unilateral solution, that I think that's really what we're looking for. For example, our communities are all connected. So my teachers are parents in surrounding towns. If I go to an every other day schedule and they go to every other week schedule or a half day schedule, our bus drivers, our parents, our teachers, they're all interconnected. And so we create another layer of problems to solve. And I know that there's the one philosophy of, it should be driven by safety, and we shouldn't So then Michelle sits on the same group that I do. So we have this kind of tension between what's our role. But the other reality is I need to be able to staff my building with some teachers and custodians, and those are parents. And so whether or not we're a daycare provider, our students are going to go to some type of daycare facility if it's not us. And so how do we interface? Where do students go? When I talk to some surrounding districts, we now have, sixth graders babysitting for third graders because parents are working, and things that we would have called DCF on, 2 months ago are no longer things that we even know about. And so I think those are things we struggle. As I look through the texts that have been put on here, I can tell you that every one of these conversations comes with a dollar sign. All of us are facing budget constraints. And some of what we can cut out of next year's budget is dependent on what model we use. I don't think it's realistic for us to run buses with 10 students on them. We're planning for summer school now with the guidelines that came out last week. And we had conversations with the commissioner's office on Friday that in some ways they're so restrictive that we may not be able to bring our special education students into our buildings, the ones who are being served the least by the model that we're on now. So I do think there is a protocol that if I can go to the hairdresser, not that I can yet, or if I can go to the grocery store or to a movie theater, where is the standard of equity for the rules for our schools? And I do think we're going to see some movement over the next 2 to 3 months. And, I think we're in you don't want to over plan, hope isn't a plan kind of mentality. At the same time, as many school districts did with graduation, put in fairly sophisticated plans that they're not able to do. And so how do you have something that's so flexible that we can move in and out? And I think that the Western Connecticut group has been asking to find some coalescence between what's plausible and what isn't, so that districts don't create plans that conflict with one another. And the good news is, I think anyway, the state came out with models, even if there's a lot of holes in them. It was the first sign that the state is looking to create some statewide plans. I know that many people here look at like the Maryland plan or the Wisconsin plan, or the Rhode Island plan. They all start with a state name, and ours are like the Watertown plan, the Region 15 plan, the West Hartford plan. And so I do think that we need to find more regional type solutions.
Just looking at the comments in the East Con region, which is the eastern part of Connecticut, that regional service center, the districts don't feel that they have any possibility of bringing students in for extended school year programming this summer. And a question has been posed, is anyone thinking about starting the school year earlier to take advantage of the warmer weather to get ahead in the event that there is a need for closure at some point in the fall? And I know the warmer weather issue means a challenge because most of you have the majority of your buildings that are not air conditioned. Anybody want to comment on that?
We are looking at the potential or the feasibility of opening in August. I see a lot of challenges with that. Dr. Harrison, our superintendent, and I discussed that this morning. That is definitely something that our reopening advisory council is looking at. In addition, I just want to mention something that Josh said in terms of what's plausible. It's a big issue here of what is really feasible when we come back to school. And I think a lot of the problems we're working through on these committees are coming to, the end result is that some of this just isn't feasible. And I think there's going to be just a very few models that will really work. And to your point about districts really collaborating and kind of having similar programs is really important. We also have teachers and staff members who live in our town or work in surrounding towns as teachers. It's really important that there's some sort of similarity and collaboration on this amongst the districts.
Other comments and questions?
This is Debbie from Wilton. We're just wondering, to Josh's point about some sort of rallying points where we can all do something in common, or, sort of fall back on some prototypes. I'm thinking about the state's role in some of the purchasing that we may need if we are going to have to do any kind of screening for students as they enter the building, whether it's thermometers or infrared or some sort of nursing protocol, or whatever other PPE might be needed. What help in terms of just, if not funds directly, at least avoiding 169 towns all going after the same thermometers. Are there any thoughts yet to state purchasing for supplies that all districts to some extent will probably need? Thanks.
Thanks for that question. I know that the committee that Bob is on, that he has raised that issue, the need, even if the state isn't going to supply some of those tools that are going to be necessary, that if there at least be a bulk purchasing opportunity so individual districts aren't competing with each other. The RESCs already do bulk purchasing on a number of items, probably not the thermometers that we're talking about, but they know how to do bulk purchasing.
I'm curious as to how many districts are opening summer school or extended year.
In person?
Yes, in person.
In Westport, we haven't decided yet, but we probably will within about a week or so. But I don't think it's looking good.
In Torrington, we are opening for summer school.
In Wilton, we don't yet know. The decision will have to be made in the next week or so, obviously. Thanks.
In Region 15, we are committed to having some type of program. We haven't made a total commitment. We have surveyed families, but I think as you look at the list of requirements that need to be made, it is really hard to see the most, our most fragile students are going to be really challenged to be able to come in for any length of time. And in our case, the Park and Rec is literally in the same building as us, and their summer program does not have the same restrictions that ours does. And so that's kind of the message that we took last week, that at least give us the early childhood standards, which say you can have 9 students and 1 adult together without a mask, where ours does not say that. So how is it appropriate for one group and not another? However, we're going to try to bring somebody in. We need cars in our parking lot. We need buses to run. If we're going to do anything in the fall, we feel we need to start this somewhere.
Thanks for that. We see that Region 13 is doing distance only for summer school and extended school year, as is Bethany. And a number of you are in the process of making that decision. I do think that if there were similar protocols for summer school as for the Park Rec programs, that might serve as a pilot to figure out what's working and what some of the unanticipated challenges are before we got to September dealing with a much larger population.
Hello?
Yes?
Who is this, please?
Is that Bob?
Yes, Patrice, I muted him.
Thank you, Wilmarie.
You're welcome.
Other comments?
This is Christine Wagner with North Stonington School District. I guess I'm just can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm a little bit concerned about come up with 2 or 3 scenarios and everybody needs to follow that. We're a really small pre-K through 12 district. We have opportunities in front of us that maybe other districts don't have because of our size, and feel that we can put a good plan in place because of that. And I'm a little bit concerned also with being lumped with, what's going on the western side of the state versus a town on the southeast corner that has 5,500 for a population, and kind of having our hands tied to, you know, a one size fits all. So I would have a little bit of a issue or push back a little bit on coming up with two or three scenarios, and this is how it has to be done.
And that definitely is one of the challenges and one of the tensions that we're seeing, that districts are unique because of their size, because of their geographic location, because of the availability of perhaps a school that they've just recently closed, that they could reopen and provide additional classroom space there, as well as transportation logistics. Another big factor is that in some of our districts, it is our students most in need who have not been engaged at all in distance learning. And if we are not able to reconnect with those students soon, we will be talking about losing them long-term, not just a 6-month learning gap. I know there's a lot of activity going on in the chat room that I'm question about, has anyone thought about what about young children and their inability to or unwillingness to keep masks on? Janet, looks like you've been thinking about that.
Yes, we've been talking about that, wondering how long those would last. You know, those of us been in schools for a good while know that their value the kids will put on that, it just is not understood and will be very difficult. And so we're having some discussions about that and what other kinds of things we have to do to teach students about the value of 6 feet and walking not separately in the halls and so forth. We've been talking about the difficulty of actually teaching kids how to deal with these things. And if any of you as adults are wearing your masks, as we do around here, it's hard to keep on for adults. So this is an issue. And for the little ones who have snacks in class, they're going to take off their masks anyway.
Anyone else with a question or something they want to share? Go ahead.
Patrice, do you think that, I mean, I know this is totally speculative, but the more we dig into this and the more I see that most districts are looking at in real life over the summer, which is theoretically easier to do than full on school. Do you think at some point, like, we're just not having school? Or do you think the state is just like, we must have school? I can't get a read on where they're going.
I don't want to speculate on that. I don't think that we're at the point of giving up on I don't think the state is at the point of giving up on the notion of some version of in-person instruction in the fall. But I would not want to speculate further than that. We're part of a weekly call with the Commissioner of Education, which includes all the statewide educational organizations, the superintendents, the teachers unions, the principals, CAS, are all on that call. And clearly there continues to be this urging by the commissioner to look at the logistical issues and try and address them for some type of in-person instruction in the fall. But ultimately that will be part of an executive order. Anyone else?
Sorry, this is Karen from Greenwich again. For those of you who have been involved in some of the state discussions, I was curious if there has been any discussion as to any revisions to next year's required curriculum or graduation requirements, as I would assume with a lot of fallout between distance learning this year and catch up at the start of next year and the possibilities of having to close again, I know that there were graduation requirements that were somewhat waived for this fall. I don't know if there's any discussions happening for next year, giving some sort of latitude for reopening committees to look at some of these items going in, knowing that there might be some relaxation.
I have not heard any discussion that far ahead, and Janet is shaking her head.
I haven't heard anything either.
The only thing I have heard is about the smarter balanced assessment, and the next gen accountability standards. They won't be held next year. Whether or not we take the test, it won't be used for the next generation accountability, which makes sense because you're not going to have any tests this year to show growth from anyway. And I think the only speculation that we would have is it's too soon. If there truly is a vaccination available in August, if there truly is some type of treatment in the fall, I think things change dramatically. One of the challenges of all this work is, are we putting in a solution for 3 months, for 1 year, or for 4 years? You know, and I think that as we talk about budgets, we talk daily. So for our district, buying a Zoom license is $15,000 next year. You know, if I'm going to buy Zoom for 1 month, there's not a cost benefit to that. We'll limp along with Google Meet or some tool that's free. If I need to have it for the full school year, then I'm going to have to cut something else in the budget and find the funds to purchase that tool. And so I think that's one of the kind of go, no-go decisions that we're making now is, here's our list of software that's free. Here's a list of software that regardless of what next year is, we need now in our district for long-term. It's fundamentally going to be a part of our curriculum. And then here's stuff that if we're going to be out for a year is a must-have. If it's not, you know, if it's a month or two, I had a conversation this morning, maybe we don't start kindergarten in August. Maybe we wait until October because starting kids who have never been in school before, if we have to start online, what does that look like? And do we build something, or do we just say, wait a month and come later? So I think that's one of the challenges that we have right now, is that everything's so fluid. And that's where I don't know that there's a one size fits all solution, but we shouldn't have so many human capital or so much human capital tied up in having lots of different conversations if there's certain things that we all can agree on, whether that's PPE ordering, or it'd be great to talk about state licensing for some of these tools. Do we settle on some learning platform? I talk to districts all the time who use different types of learning management systems. You know, I think those are helpful conversations for all of us to have, because regardless of what we do, some of those are now part of the narrative moving forward, and we can't all afford to live on our own and find funding for it.
Josh, I just had a question. It's Sheila McKay. How much do you think you'll be spending in subscriptions, new subscriptions, just a ballpark?
The reason I waffle on that is just because we haven't come to agreement on what's a need versus a want. You know, I would say that list easily totals $70,000 to $100,000.
Have any of you been talking about professional development for your staff? And again, I know this is an unknown because a lot depends upon what environment we're working in come September.
We've been talking about it, but in terms of making decisions, that's going to be kind of at the end of this process. We had already scheduled a number of people to be teams from each school going through training with Mark Brackett this summer, which has become online. So we want to continue that because we know that's going to be needed regardless. But part of what our teams are going to do, or what are the resources, what's the professional development is needed for each one of these scenarios.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
This has been one of the more interesting GoToMeeting events. Any final comments? Is it helpful if we periodically provided another opportunity for you to share where you are in this process? I see Leslie and Janet are nodding. Karen is nodding. And I can only see 6 people at once on my screen, and 3 of them are on the CABE staff. So
That would be.
all right. We will definitely offer this again. For those of you that will be on the board chair call this Thursday, Joe Brennan, the head of CBIA, has agreed to participate in that call because there were questions last week about the interplay between schools and businesses and flexibility for workers depending upon what process when schools do reopen and what that scheduling looks like. I want to thank very much Allison, Janet, and Leslie for their participation. A special thanks to Leslie for instigating this. And know that when you make suggestions on a board chair call, we do try and follow up with that.
So, thank you very much. I really
With
appreciate
that,
it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and
Thank
stay safe.
you.
Bye all.